This podcast contains strong language and discussions about relationships, sex, and love. It may not be suitable for younger listeners. This is the Can't Keep My Mouth Shut podcast, and I am Nixalina. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Can't Keep My Mouth Shut with me, Nixalina, your favorite podcaster. This episode is a heavy one, putting that in there immediately right now. It's intense, it's heavy, but it's also one that I recommend very highly that you bookmark and listen to often when dating. It is called Cluster B Personality Types to Avoid When Dating. We have Antisocial, Borderline, Histrionic, and Narcissists. This is the exact noise you need to make when we list off these types of people. So let's firstly start with why I'm doing this episode. Because your bitch here has had two very, very traumatic, narcissistically abusive relationships. And I've talked about them a lot in my previous podcast, Sex in Singapore City. I went with a covert narcissist for 4.5 years to an overt grandiose narcissist for a year. Why I went with two is a whole episode entirely. It happens regularly, so please don't think there's anything abnormal with me. Often, if you're the type of person that attracts a cluster B personality disorder into your life, you'll do it more than once until you are healed, of which I am now. But yes, I have unknowingly dated these two types of men, and it's almost nearly destroyed me, my psyche, my life in general. If I had known about narcissism, cluster Bs in general, I would have been armed a lot more earlier to be able to understand the toxicity, what's going on, and get out earlier, right? But I was pretty clueless. And even when I went to my grandiose narcissist after the first one, even though I taught myself about narcissism, I still didn't understand the depths and the levels and the varieties, because then that's why I, got the second one. So what I want to do today is discuss these in depth so that you guys don't live through what I lived through. That's my main aim of the game. And I really genuinely believe mental disorders and personality disorders should be taught at school. I think when we grow up in our teens, we should learn about this stuff. Even if it's perhaps to help those going through that, if a teenager is discovering they might be antisocial, borderline, I think it should be educated. And it's not, as far as I'm aware. And, in the general curriculum when you're young. So here I am, trying to educate us all as adults so we can make better life choices. So firstly, I want to make it very clear, not a qualified professional in the mental health field, not a psychologist or counselor. I am a narcissistic abuse survivor and a victim of narcissistic abuse, which has led me to research, understand, and this is the kind of relationship you will not grasp unless you've been through it. So shout out to all the victim survivors of narcissistic abuse. I got you. And yes, people don't understand, which is something you just accept. So what I reel off today, please note, like I said, you can Google and research it, but I am not a qualified professional, but this is just me helping you with information from what I've been through. So a personality disorder, what is this? It's a mental health condition that affects the way that that person thinks, behaves, and relates to others. These disorders often lead to huge amounts of distress and usually really quite harmful, self-destructive coping strategies for that person with the disorder. People in the cluster B type definitely have trouble regulating their emotions and definitely struggle to maintain relationships. So the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 5th edition, DSM-5, have clarified these 10 personality disorders and split them into 3 main clusters. Okay, so it's 3 categories. Cluster A is the most severe. So a person with this type is, they're very unusual, eccentric, unique. The 3 cluster A's are paranoid, schizoid, and schizotypal personality disorders. Cluster B is 4 disorders: antisocial, borderline, histrionic, and narcissistic. These people, very dramatic, emotional, erratic, and difficulty regulating their emotions. Cluster C has 3 personality disorders. These are just generally anxious and avoidant. So we have avoidant, dependent, and obsessive compulsive personality disorders. What I'll say now is these can overlap. Yes, you can have more than one personality disorder, which actually makes it very difficult for diagnosis, which then also makes it very difficult for treatment. For instance, psychoanalytic therapies don't really work for cluster B personality types. And often narcissists will go into therapy with an aim to outwit your counsellor or therapist, and it's hard to spot. So, yeah, it's a very complex field that we're dealing with in this episode, and it's difficult because a lot of them share a very similar behaviours. So you can have like the lack of concern for other people's well-being. You can have the lack of morality, and that is in antisocials, but also in narcissists. So it's like it overlaps as well. Yeah, it is quite tricky. So please bear with me on this one. I'm going to try and help you understand as much as possible. The reason I am dealing only with cluster B personality disorders in this episode is because, one, it's I don't want to bore you all to death. I hope I never bore you to death anyway. But these are the main ones that I find often cause toxic relationships. I mean, they're all extremely damaging to be around. But I find often, especially in this day and age, cluster Bs just seem to be quite prevalent. Also, the word narcissism is thrown around all over the place, and no one really actually seems to grasp what it is. It's like, oh, she takes loads of selfies. What a narcissist. No, she's vain. Taking selfies for social is not your diagnosis of narcissism, okay? But we'll get to that. So let me break down the first one, which is antisocial personality disorder, also referred to as a sociopath. So a person with this disorder behaves in a way that just basically shows a complete disregard for the rights and needs of anyone else. Common features would be deceitful, manipulative, and highly criminal behavior. So a lot of people in prison, a majority of the prison population would probably have antisocial PD, or at least on the spectrum. And that's another thing I would point in now. You can be on the spectrum of these personality disorders. So that makes it even more difficult, annoyingly, to work out, because maybe someone is just on the cusp or, like a lower antisocial PD than someone else. So actually they don't look as bad in comparison. So then you think, well, they can't be antisocial because they haven't done this, this, and this that person has, Antisocial PD types will probably be very charming. Very similar to narcissists in that they just disregard moral values and social norms. They can hurt people and have no remorse. And honestly, they most likely repeatedly getting arrested. They also lie a lot as well, which annoyingly, so do narcissists. I think the main difference to understand with antisocial PD is they just have no regard for laws, moral laws, laws of the land, or people's feelings. They lie and cheat to get their own goals met. They're very manipulative, and they just feel no remorse for their actions. They're also highly likely to be addicted to substances like alcohol and drugs. So general traits of antisocial PD are as follows: persistent lying and deceit on purpose. with the aim to exploit other people around them. Very callous, cynical disrespect of other people in general and people around them. Extreme arrogance. Reoccurring criminal behavior. They'll be the ones in and out prison. They'll be the ones with a DUI. If you don't know what that is, it's a driving under the influence of alcohol arrest or revoked license. They'll be the ones that are busted for drug use or possession or whatever. Just stealing, it just reoccurring criminal behavior. They have a failure to plan ahead. So it's very much live in the moment, of course, because if you try and plan ahead and you can't do these reckless things and have a future plan. They lack remorse and empathy, which sadly I think a lot of the cluster B types have, just the lack of remorse and empathy. To be able to hurt someone else the way these cluster B types do, you have to have no empathy. These antisocial PDs also have recurring abusive relationships. And they have a very difficult time in hiding their bad behavior as well. So it is quite easy to spot, right? If someone is an addict or in and out of prison or just, the way they behave is like they're a law unto their own. If you're around that for a period of time, you would notice. It is very similar to narcissism, I'll give you that. But these are just way more reckless. They don't have as much grandiose, or we'll get onto narcissism in a minute, but these are more just antisocial, as the name says. They just don't give a shit about society, about community, about other people. They think they're above the law or don't give a fuck about the law anyway. And if they can get away with it, they will. And if it serves their needs, they'll do it. End of. It's very self-serving. Stealing and cheating and lying is easy to them because they've got no empathy. Fucking awful, isn't it? Even me listing this off, I'm like, Jesus Christ, imagine being in a relationship with someone with antisocial PD. Fucking hell. Just awful. It goes without saying, if you note any of these types of traits in someone, you run, okay? You run a mile. Moving on to borderline personality disorder. People with borderline PD basically, bless them, have extreme difficulty maintaining relationships with any person. They have a deep, deep fear of abandonment, complete instability, very large impulsive reactions to stresses. It is more likely, you'll find this interesting, it's more likely for women to be diagnosed with borderline PD than men. Borderline personality disorders cause instability in mood, behavior, and self-image, very, very unstable moods, intense joy, and then intense rage. When I say it is more likely for women to have BPD, I don't mean that men don't have it. So don't go, oh, well, he's a bloke, so he can't be BPD. It may well be. I often wonder about my narcissist ex, whether he in fact does have a borderline PD, but I think the root cause is the narcissism, and then he tries to self-regulate with all the substances, and that seems to create some borderline issues that come off, but I don't think it is. So someone with borderline PD will have actually very poor self-image, and they display impulsive behaviours. A lack of stability in their relationships is actually the main characteristic of this condition. They basically just go from intense anger or to extreme sadness. And it will be over things that other people wouldn't consider as distressing to get that reaction. So then what they do is then that regulates their poor self-image, right? Because of their extreme mood swings. They also have this thing called splitting, where they see people as either completely good or completely bad. There's black and white. There's no grey. You're either the devil or you're a saint to be idolized. Of all the cluster Bs, this one gets my heart the most because I can't imagine living with such a high and a low emotional day-to-day output and not being able to regulate that. That must be actually quite distressing and frightening for them, especially if you are undiagnosed borderline PD. And also because people around them can't cope, then they will leave, or the people around them will be, blamed, or it's, to have that instability in relationships. And I'm not talking just partners, I mean friendships and colleagues and everyone around you and family. It must be quite isolating. So here's a list of traits for borderline PD for you to look out for. So it's intense fear of abandonment, right? It's a root. That's the root of it, which, I must say, narcissists also have. This is here where the overlap is. Intense fear of abandonment often leading to extreme behavior to prevent that abandonment, okay? They idolize someone, then, like, at the drop of a hat on a whim, suddenly believe that person's, like, cruel or evil, and there won't really be anything that would have happened to make that huge change. And that's just how it is. So I was thinking about my ex-fiancé at this point, where one minute I was the most perfect woman in the world, and then the next he didn't even want to touch me or have sex with me, and I did nothing wrong. Nothing had changed. At this point, we're still getting married, right? So that sounds very borderline. You'd think, actually, because he's gone from, the black and white, thinking you're like a saint and the best woman he's ever met, to like, don't even want to have sex with you, don't want to hang out with you, like not interested in conversing. What happened? Well, actually, no, that's a typical narcissist cycle of devaluation. They idolize, they devaluate, and they discard. But as you can see, that's very difficult to determine from the same splitting that a borderline PD has, where it's extreme changes. So, yeah, it's difficult. I understand. It's difficult even explaining this, let alone living it and trying to work out. Because the reason I'm discussing this is so that if you are going through any of this with someone, you can help try and at least characterize them in your mind, which might help you then get out of the relationship or at least deal with them appropriately. Anyway, borderline, moving on, extremely impulsive behavior. Like, that's a flat. Very, very impulsive in the moment, like some absurd life decisions made. Giant mood swings. That's the main one. Giant mood swings. Rage, extreme happiness, feeling godlike, then feeling like the worst human on the planet, feeling just so happy to, like, want to, rage out, violence, punch someone. Sometimes there is suicidal threats or self-injury, particularly if in their relationship, which we know that they have a lack of stability in, their relationship is ending. That will also tie in with their fear of abandonment. Like, if I threaten to kill myself or harm myself, you'll stay. So that's like their extreme behavior and making sure you don't leave. I'm not saying that other people don't go down that route of threatening to self-harm at end of relationships. It's like a desperate move for someone who just can't bear the idea of the relationship ending. That's not specific to just borderline PDs. They also have, sadly, a constant feeling of emptiness and periods of extreme paranoia, combined with inappropriate, intense anger and fighting. And that intense anger and fighting also leads, ironically, to the breakdown of their relationships, and the stability of the relationships goes, and they are, quote unquote, abandoned, which pervades their deep, deep fear of abandonment. And the cycle, as you can see, starts over and over again. I just can't imagine living with this. It must be extremely difficult. So I do feel sorry for the borderline personality disorders. I'm not saying that, the others are cruel and these are not. Absolutely not. I'm just saying, when I list off how they must live, I just think that intense rage and intense joy and those mood swings must just be very, very difficult to live with. Third, we have histrionic personality disorder, something I'm assuming many of you haven't heard of. It's not commonly discussed, certainly not in the way the words like sociopath or narcissist are thrown about these days. But histrionic is a key cluster B PD, and it involves extreme attention-seeking behavior. Just excessive emotionality, erratic behaviors, superficial relationships, attention-seeking behavior that just is almost on the edge of absurd. A person with Histrionic personality disorder will be lively, enthusiastic, charming, flirtatious. They may act in a way that's very inappropriate, like even with their cultural context or within a work or career context. They have to be center of attention. Always center of attention. And they will perform these attention-seeking behaviors in inappropriate situations. I hate to say it, but once again, women are much more likely to have histrionic personality disorder than men. Us women, huh? They are shallow, they are flighty, and this is my key issue with histrionic, especially in the world of social media that we have now, is actually everyone seems pretty attention-seeking online. Everyone seems like they need the validation, they need the dopamine hit of the likes, of the follows. So it's very difficult, once again, to pin down as an actual personality disorder. Do you just love attention? Are you just very flirty? Do you just dress provocatively? Do you just come off as sexy? Or do you have histrionic PD, which is a whole different thing? You know, how difficult is that really to actually pin down that diagnosis? And that's the struggle, if I'm honest, with these types of personality disorders, is almost in our modern world. We've incorporated it and almost normalized it. So, list of traits with histrionic PD for you to look out for is as follows. They are uncomfortable unless they are the center of attention. Dress provocatively, demonstrate flirty and seductive behavior in inappropriate situations. They act dramatically and without sincerity. They make very rash decisions. They may even fake a suicide attempt for attention, like not saying that that's part and parcel of it, like, oh, you didn't try and commit suicide, you don't have histrionic. They may go to those extremes. We're living in a world of extremes here, and that is an extreme. They're very, very concerned with their physical appearance, way more so than any like soul nurturing ideas or building themselves up as a better human. It's very surface level, very superficial, very outward. They're easily influenced by others and they have a low tolerance to frustration or criticism. So yes, this one is a tricky one because, as I've said, it's basically like someone who just wants all the attention all the time. I think the key thing to point out here is it's inappropriate situations on repeat that you would think, why are you behaving that way? Or like, that's really disrespectful. Or like, why are you constantly flirting or cheating when you have a partner? And why are you, like someone who's just desperately in need of attention, regardless of anyone else around them. No one else matters. Their attention, their validation, their praise, saying how great they are, that's all they need. Everything else really matters. So it is an extreme end of, what I'd say today is someone who is just vain or someone who does just love themselves. It's different. So it's best to not ever confuse those two. And fourth, but definitely not least, my favorite, narcissistic PD. So a person with a narcissistic personality disorder, basically they'll act like they are superior to others. They display intense patterns of grandiose behavior, have a deep need for admiration, and show a huge lack of empathy. They are very ego-led. They have a severe sense of entitlement, complete grandiose, just honestly think they're superior to everyone else around them. And people like this never care about their partners, only about themselves. As a partner, you are an object to them. You are a commodity. You are a possession. You are not a human. You're not a human with needs or wants or feelings that they need to take into consideration, ever. You are there to satiate them, to build them up, to make them feel godlike, and that's your role. Both men and women have NPD, but it is always more likely to be men who are narcissists. I could have told you that. So we women gravitate more towards histrionic and borderline. Antisocial and narcissism is more towards the men. Why there's this gender differentiation, I haven't yet explored, but it's definitely something I'd be really interested in, is to find out why is it about the male psyche that makes them more antisocial, narcissistic versus the female psyche. But yes, narcissists tend to be more men, can be both. All of these cluster Bs and cluster As and Cs as well can always be both genders. Narcissists think that they are way more attractive and way more intelligent than they actually are. I can completely attest to that with my ex-fiancé, who acted like he was Brad Pitt and a millionaire, and it turns out he's neither. Yeah, absolutely. Like, couldn't be further from neither. Lied about how wealthy he was, lied about how many properties he had. I mean, the guy was rich. We all saw the rock he put on my finger, but it wouldn't surprise me if that was bought for fucking credit card, honestly. Which moves me on nicely to the next point, is that they actually have a very fragile self-esteem. And they're very vulnerable if slighted. So any minor criticism, you'll notice. There's one example. I took my fiancé to my friend's house. We was all drinking. They'd met them for the first time. I had told my fiancé that my friend was president of this extremely prestigious car brand. So I think my fiancé felt a little bit put out because of the different levels of ego. And basically he acted out the whole night, seemed to like decline bottles of champagne saying they weren't good enough for him. And I'd never really understood why the fuck he was behaving like that. But then anyway, him and this dude, they got into an arm wrestle. My ex-fiancé lost because he's not as strong as he thinks he is. And the rage in his face, like, looking, I just couldn't see it at the time, but looking back, he was fucking fuming because he lost an arm wrestle. Like, move on, get over it. Everyone's drinking and having a laugh. But it was like that embarrassment, you know, the show up. Like, fuck, I left. Hey. Anyway, let's move on to the list of traits to look out for narcissistic PD. Extreme negative reaction to criticism. An elevated sense of self-importance. Oh, God, they think that the world owes them something and we were supposed to worship at their feet. And the reality is, deep inside, they're not even worth any worship, not even a sliver of your time. They're constantly thinking about success, wealth, obsessed with like being rich and successful. And aren't I great? Excessive need for admiration. Most of them cheat. Not all narcissists cheat. Most of them do. They need narcissistic supply at all times. They'll get bored with their partner very easily once they have you. And so they need that new admiration and all that new lovely stuff from other women and other men. My ex-fiancé cheated on every single one of us. Every single one of us. From the age of 19 to 30, every long-term girlfriend he had, he was unfaithful on every single one. Speaks volumes, huh? And I'm the only one he proposed to. Even that didn't stop him. So there you go. Even a fiancé wasn't enough. They have a strong sense of entitlement, which ties into the cheating. I'm entitled to do what I want. I want to have sex with that hot girl over. I'm entitled to that. No one can tell me otherwise. I'm entitled to do whatever I want to do. And that sense of entitlement means that if you ever have a conversation or an argument with them, you never win. You never you're hurt. They have no interest. Which moves me on to the next trait. They always think they're right. Always think they're right. And even if they know they're not right, they'll argue as if they are. So you catch them out cheating and it's like, yeah, but you made me do it. Or, yeah, but nothing actually happened. Or, yeah, but you're blowing it out of proportion. They have to be right. They can't just say, like, I fucked up, I'm the worst human in the world. No. They talk a lot about themselves. Oh, my God. I used to say to my ex-fiancé, and I didn't realise, honestly, I was picking up on it. But I said, do you know that you always overtalk me? And I was like, and you do it with other people as well. And he was like, really? I said, yeah. You never let me finish a sentence, ever. And half the time, what you're trying to finish my sentence at is not what I'm saying at all. That's not what I'm trying to say. Always. And then he got all a bit flustered about it and apparently went off and spoke to his workmates and was like, do I always overtalk you? And they were like, well, yeah, but that's just you. I think I really bothered him by pointing out a flaw in how perfect he thought he was. But yeah, always talk about themselves. He used to glow. I'm the big breadwinner in this company. I make the most money in this company. I'm this, I'm that. And seemingly wouldn't care to let me voice an opinion or finish one of my own sentences. They're very exploitative. They're very manipulative, like antisocials are. Also have a disregard for laws and morals, because laws and morals are below them, because we're all mere humans who live by societal laws and they do not. So, and morals as well. Morals like being faithful, below them. They could do what the fuck they want. They're entitled. And they also exaggerate their talents and achievements, which my ex did as well. Told me about 1 billion properties. I don't think any of them existed. Told me he earned the most in the company. Absolutely did not. Told me this, that, and the other. And all things turn out to be absolute bollocks. The one before him, the covert narcissist, constantly called himself an entrepreneur. He wasn't. He was a PT. He was a personal trainer. And I'm not shitting on personal trainers. And also you can be a personal trainer and be an entrepreneur. He wasn't an entrepreneur. He just wasn't. But yeah, they have inflated sense of self, inflated ego, and they just think they're the fucking shit. And if you at any point question them on it, then you're off. Then they'll be cruel, they'll switch, or they'll go and cheat on you or dump you and discard you and move on because you once made them feel less about themselves than what they really are, which is godlike and above humans. So there you have it. There are your 4 key cluster B personality disorders. Would love you all to bookmark this episode, save it, re-listen to it, and just keep it in your back mind when you are meeting people and dating, because they really are prevalent in society. And I don't know what the fuck has happened, but it feels like they're becoming more and more prevalent, or maybe we're just more educated now. There weren't these terms many generations ago when they were around. Someone was either just cruel, or cheap, but you never understood the other side of it. What I will say is being on the receiving end of one of these personality disorders is actually very traumatic. And I do advise you, if you have been, to go through therapy and healing and, voice maybe your concerns. Because, of course, we can't diagnose with 100% conviction that our partners or ex-partners are any of these. I know what I went through. I know the level of lying and everything, and I know the last 2 were narcissists, but I can never prove it. They won't go to therapy. And if they go to therapy, they'll trick the therapist because they won't answer questions correctly. It's difficult. So I have to go with my gut. I can't prove they are, but I know they are. And I know every trait of a narcissist they both had, but are very different, covert and overt. Yeah, I will never be able to prove it. So what I do instead is I heal from it knowing that they are, and that's all I need to know. I know what I live through in my experiences. And I just hope everyone who has also gone through relationships with any of these have looked to healing and armed themselves with information such as this episode to help move on and heal from any of the wounds caused. What you might be wondering before I sign off, can these people get help and change? They can. They can. Very rare, but they can. But it has to come from them. My fiancé would need to go and sit down and say, I have a deep narcissistic personality disorder. I have severe addictions. I need rehab and help. He will never do that because he doesn't think he's a narcissist. He doesn't think he's a narcissist because he can't have anything wrong with him because he thinks he's so great. You see? You see the problem? So he would never admit to that. He can't handle that. Because he's godlike. So there's no way he has a personality disorder. Although, to be fair, he could also be borderline. So fuck knows what's going on with them. The alcohol and all the addictions mask really what's going on underneath. So you'd have to be sober for a year before you actually find out what PD he has. But yeah, do they get help? If they do, willingly themselves, if they hit rock bottom, they do and they can. and they can get the tools needed and or the medication needed to help them live a better, more fulfilling, normal life. Yeah, I want to make that clear. Like, this isn't just like a list of people that are doomed. It'd be the same as getting help for depression or anxiety. You've got to face up that you have it first and be willing to change. On that note, that is the end of this episode. I'd love to hear your thoughts if this is helpful. It's quite a different take on my normal episodes. It's a lot more informative, more serious, but I think it's actually extremely important, and it's been something I wanted to talk about for a very long time now. So thank you all for tuning in. And yeah, if you need any more further help with any of these discussed today, please do slide into my DMs on Instagram or TikTok at Nixalina, Nixalina. Thanks for listening to the Can't Keep My Mouth Shut podcast. Produced and hosted by me, Nixalina, and recorded in the Splicecast Studios in Singapore. I'm available to listen to on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google, and all major podcast listening apps. Do subscribe to enjoy a new episode every Monday evening. Please do give me a 5-star review. It helps other people also find my podcast. For more content and features to read, you can check out my website, nixalina.com. That's nixalina.com. I'm also on social media. Simply search at Nixalina, Nixalina, to find me. Don't be shy. Come say hi.